Perfect. Thank you everyone for joining.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Really excited today to get going here. I wanted to start by asking all of you a few questions. And so here's the questions that I want to ask. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Zoom, but I see some of you've got your videos on. Thank you so much. Love to see you. But if you don't have your video on, you don't feel comfortable, you can just do react through the reaction button. You can do thumbs up, clapping hands, just so I know that you're with me as we go through this 90 minutes. All right, I've seen some thumbs up. So if any of you if you can find that reaction piece on your screen there, just give me a thumbs up. That's great. For those of you who have your videos on, give me a wave, right? Awesome. Yay! I see people all over the place. This is so great. Okay. So I wanted to start by asking you guys 3 questions. So the first question is this: how many of you have ever been in a situation where you were totally prepared and you got into this meeting or a presentation and all of a sudden you could barely even get the words out? It was just like, it felt like, oh, has anybody ever had that happen? Okay, all right, a few of us. And have you ever been in a situation where you go in and that your nerves took over, that you started to feel your face flushing, you started to feel like your voice was getting jittery, and you didn't really know what was happening? Has that ever happened to anybody? Okay. And have any of you ever been in a situation where you get into, you're doing a presentation, presenting at a meeting, speaking up, and all of a sudden you're thinking about your performance. You're thinking about what you just forgot to say. You're thinking about what you're about to say. You're like all over the map and you're evaluating your performance as you're going. Has anybody ever had that experience? All right, yes, we are in the right place because it happens to all of us. And what I'm hoping today is that we can think about kind of from the perspective of, we often feel like this. Let's see if I can get my screen going here. We feel like this lady here when those things happen, right? You leave that meeting or you leave that presentation or you leave that meeting with your manager and you're like, what was I thinking? Why didn't I say that? Why did I do this? And we feel a little bit like this lady here. So the idea is what we want to do is try to narrow the gap between where we kind of are and where we want to be when we think about showing up in a way we want to have presence. And we're never going to totally close the gap, right? We just want to see if we can start to narrow it. And I found this picture and I thought it just sort of was perfect for defining that. So we're going to talk in a minute about what presence is, but I want to share with you sort of what I call my epic fail when it came to presence, which is what encouraged me to sort of put together what I'm going to share with you today, because I wanted to prevent that from ever happening again. So for most of you, when you signed up, you probably saw that, in my previous life, I was a litigation lawyer. So I was a courtroom lawyer. I was always pretty comfortable on my feet. That's something that I'm naturally kind of pretty comfortable with. But like everybody, it takes practice, and I've had those moments where I have not been able to show up in the way that I wanted to and to share what was really important. And so my epic fail was, it was in 2013. And I'd left law for a number of years at that point, and I was sort of launching this new career, around difficult conversations and leadership development. And I was part of the eWomen Network, and they had their annual retreat, or their annual conference, I should say, in Dallas, Texas, and they had a thing called North America's Next Greatest Speaker. And so a few of my friends encouraged me, well, this would be a great way to really launch this new part of your career, to really get out there. I just written a book, so I thought this was going to be so great. And so you had to send in a video clip of you presenting, and they narrowed it down to 15 people. Then they put it out for a vote, and they invited the top 10 people to come and speak at it. And so I was very lucky to be one of those top 10 people. And as I started to prepare for this for this presentation or this speaking contest, it was like all of my normal confidence went out the window. I hired one coach to help me figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to say it. That didn't really work out. I was getting advice from my son's then 16-year-old son's friend who was in drama class about, how I should present. I then hired a sort of the top-notch kind of speaking coach, fellow out of Boston. He was amazing. He wrote my speech and then he choreographed everything and how I was supposed to deliver it. And so I get down to Dallas. And here, are you guys hearing a little bit of ringing there? Is it okay?
We did hear a bit, but I think it should be fine.
Okay, I'll keep, if it keeps going, I'll change my audio, right? We've always got to go on the fly with whatever's happening. So I get down there and I have put so much pressure on myself. I was so focused, as we often are when we're doing presentation, on the outcome, right? Because people said to me, oh, don't worry, you're going to do great and it's going to be fantastic. And just before I went in to do the talk, they had everybody in the back hall, behind the banquet rooms. And I was sitting there, twiddling my thumbs, watching people come out, the super confident people. I just completely psyched myself out. Somebody said to me, who had a lot of experience, you need to use a handheld mic, not the lavalier. And I get up onto the stage and I deliver this, everything exactly as planned. Stand here, say this, move 3 steps, stand here, do this. But I could barely get the words out, like my voice was cracking. I was thinking about how awful I was while I was doing it, because I really was awful. And it was just like one of those experiences when it was over, I was just like, never again. I'm never doing that. I'm never speaking again. That was so horrible. Have any of you ever had that experience? And I just thought, what went so wrong? And so when I left that after that event, I thought, and clearly I did not make the top 3. That was the end of my run for North America's Next Greatest Speaker. And I realized afterwards, like, what happened? I need to kind of dissect this and figure it out, because I don't want this to happen again. I don't want my body, my voice, and what I'm thinking to fail me in those most important moments. And so that's when I started kind of saying, okay, what do I need to do differently? And what are some of those things that I can put in my backpack, those tools? And because you know what, we all have presence. It's just accessing it when we need it most. And that's sometimes when we don't have it. Okay, that's when we don't have it. And when I say we all have presence, I want you to think about a time in your life where you had a non-negotiable. Something that was really, really important, that you were really clear about, that, it could be something to do with somebody asks you to do something that you think is not ethical. I think of a typical example when my kids were little. I was absolutely adamant, like they could not go in a car without seatbelts. So if I had to deliver that message, I didn't have to waver. I didn't have to question myself. It was just so clear. It just came out. So if you think about a non-negotiable in your life, when you've had to deliver that message, I'm pretty sure that you would have done that with presence, that you would have done that with confidence. And we want to tap into that sort of as we go forward. So when we think about this question about what is presence, and if any of you feel comfortable turning off your mic and sharing it, what do you think when you think of the word presence? Like, what is it? Because it's something that's kind of hard to define. I don't know if any of you have read Amy Cuddy's book. She's got a book called Presence. And even after I read it, it wasn't 100% clear to me what it was. But is there anybody who'd like to jump in? Leslie.
One thing I think of is one of those movies where they're walking in formation, kind of in slow motion. There's 4 of them. They're walking towards some rocket ship or something, and it's really important, and they are standing straight and they're walking really, really confidently. That's what.
Okay, cool. So it's this like kind of this knowing, right? Walking confidently, knowing. Sometimes we think of presence as charisma. And I remember I went to a talk where the speaker described charisma as this, oh, you can't say no to me, right? I'm so charming and da, da. But that's not necessarily presence. I mean, charisma may help, right? Sometimes we think, well, is it extroversion? But a lot of times it's when we think about it, sometimes when introverts share something, we really listen. So I don't think it's introversion either. I mean, when you think about present, the word, it's about being here in this moment now, right? It's being able to access and share those things that you're hoping to share. It's having people listen to what it is that you have to say. It's all of those kinds of things. And I don't think we need to get hung up on what the definition is, but just kind of keep that in mind that when we start to tell ourselves, well, it's charisma or it's extroversion, and we don't think that we have those things, then we're not going to have the presence that we need. All right, so I want you to think about today. I'd like you to grab a piece of paper if you have one, and I want you to draw what your personal backpack looks like. So just like do a circle of a backpack. This is one that I found that I kind of thought was cute. And throughout the next hour and a bit, okay, before we get to questions, I want you to think about every time you have an aha, okay? Or if you have an aha, or I say something that kind of resonates for you, that you think this is a tool that I want to put in my backpack, just make a note of it on your piece of paper, your leadership presence backpack. Because here's the thing, is presence isn't about, okay, I'm going to decide today I have it, therefore I have it. It's doing little things. It's adding little things into your backpack that you have them there. And then all of a sudden, when you're in a situation where you really want to draw on that presence, you'll find it. It'll be there for you. And little things have a big impact. Okay. So I just want to keep that in mind as you go through this. Some of these things you'll have heard before, some may be new. And if we can really bring that beginner's mindset. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, I found this, I love this little drawing to remind us of when we think about, like when I told you sort of about that epic fail that I had in Dallas, Texas, or for me, it was an epic fail because I wasn't able to be who I really was. And when I had a conversation with one of the judges after the event, he said to me, I wish you could have been more like you are right now. You know, like you're so dynamic and but that didn't show up. You were so kind of controlled and perfect. So let's just take this right now. Being perfect is not the answer. Remembering everything you wanted to say is not the answer. Okay, so we can just forget about that. Thank you, Brené Brown, for telling us perfection is not what we need. Being real is way more important. But one thing I want to go back to, and this is something I remind myself of all the time. I'll show you something I actually have sitting right by my desk. I don't know if you can see this, but this is mine. I'll show you. I've got a slide of it later, but this is a picture of me when I'm 3 and I put my superhero cape on, because I want you to think about when you were a little kid. Okay, like these little guys here, these little superheroes. When you were a little kid, you didn't try something, it didn't work out, and you said, I'm not going to bother, right? Otherwise, none of us would be walking, right? You took a step, you fell, you kind of assessed it. You didn't sit there and go, oh, what a loser you are. I can't believe that you fell over. What's wrong with you, right? Instead, it's like, okay. I mean, none of us remember, but somehow you said to yourself, you really embodied that growth mindset to say, okay, yeah, I can do this. I'll try it again. Oh, maybe I should tweak this or tweak that, or I need to do this. And it's the same with talking. It's the same with like all the things that we've done. Because if we gave up when we were little kids, none of you would be doing what you're doing now, all the amazing things that you're doing. And so I want you to, one thing you might want to put in your backpack, just an idea, is to find a picture that just embodies your superhero kid and put it somewhere, right? Turn it into a cup, put a picture by your computer to remind yourself of that tenacity, that excitement, that courage that you had when you were that little kid, because that is some of what we want to tap into as we're improving our presence. Does that make sense? Can you guys give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Okay, I know this superhero thing has been done quite a bit, but one of my favorite books is a book called Super Better. And I became acquainted with this book, Super Better, when my younger son was suffering from a concussion. And he was then having post-concussion syndrome. He was having a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and nothing was working. And when we read this book, we watched her TED Talk and we read this book, she talked about all these things that we can do, taking kind of a gameful approach to our challenges in life, bringing that superhero self. And that's how we kind of got started on it. We found pictures of him as a little kid, turned them into a superhero, started talking about putting little power-ups, and she talks about epic wins and doing little things to move you and nudge you in the direction that you want to go. So narrowing that gap. All right. Okay, cool. So let's talk about what I call the 3 P's of presence. Okay, and we're going to get into each one of these. So the first is prepare, right? The second is present. And the third, which is pause. And with lots of juicy tidbits in each one of these. And so I'd like to go through all of these kind of in order, knowing that all these things, small things have what do they do? They have a big impact. All right. So let's just, before we get started, let's just do a little body audit here. Let's everybody turn up their palms. I don't know if you can see my palms. Turn your palms up. Okay. And even just doing this for 15 seconds, let's hold this, can make us more open-minded, more receptive, just these small little tweaks, right? Okay. And then let's take our arms and just shake them up in the air. It's great. We can air our armpits because most of us are working from home. We don't have to worry about what people are thinking when we do all these things. Okay. And then shake it all out. Shake it, shake it, shake it. Okay. So let's start about the first thing, which is preparing. So there's 3 aspects. There's the content, there's our mindset, and then there's our bodies. Okay. So let's talk about content. This is where we usually spend all of our time, on the content. Okay. And even yesterday, when I was getting ready for today, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm thinking about, well, I should have this in, I should do that. What about this? And what about that? And I want to make sure I do this and make sure I do that. And then I was like, okay, whoa. We want to prepare. I'm not saying we don't want to prepare. We want to, but I think if nothing else, if we can go back and remind ourselves why what we are saying or what we need to say is important, that will give us the confidence and the courage to speak up, and to speak up in a way where we have more presence. So let's go back to thinking about one of those non-negotiables in your life, because we all have them. And when you've had to say with that non-negotiable no to something or share your view on something and how you did that, it's the same kind of thing when you think about your why. So if I go back to the situation when I was in Dallas, Texas, and what happened to me is my why became my performance. My why was winning. My why was making a good impression. And that is not a way to engage people, right? That is not a way to be able to be at your best. And really what my why was, if I think back to it, and I was sharing my personal story of doing the transition from courtroom lawyer to difficult conversations expert, partially because my marriage was failing. I was struggling how I communicated, and some of the things I learned and changing how I communicated completely transformed not only my relationship with my husband, but with my sister and a number of other people. And I was there to share what I had learned because I wanted to make that difference and make that impact. And if I'd been able to focus on that, then even as the nerves kicked in, because we're never going to totally get rid of them, and all those things happened, I probably would have been able to access what really mattered and to share that. And so when I did a talk, like I guess it was 4 years later, probably as big of a talk. I was in Washington, D.C. I was a closing keynote speaker. It was my opportunity to break into the States. I was nervous. I was stressed, but I did everything the opposite in terms of preparing for Dallas. Some of the things I'm going to share with you today, because that's when I went on that whole, like, I've got to figure this out. And I just kept reminding myself, because that was a talk on how to have difficult conversations, that I just really connected with why what I was saying mattered, how that might impact them. So if you can think about what's in it for your audience, what's in it for them with what you're having to say. So for example, even if you're thinking, okay, well, that's interesting, but what if I'm like going in to talk to my manager about getting a raise? I mean, what's in it for them? Well, what's in it for them is that they understand the value that you bring, right? That you want to be able to have more opportunities to make the impact. You know, what's in it for them if say you're really good at coming up with strategy, and that sometimes you're nervous about talking, but you've decided you're going to speak up. It's like, what's in it for them is that you bring a fresh perspective, right? That you bring a unique point of view, that you have some great ideas to share. So we start to really connect with that.
And tomorrow, oh shit, I forgot I'm listening.
Somebody's got their, somebody's talking. If they can just put your mute on, please.
Next week, I'm supposed to take me and my oldest to do blood work. It took me 6 weeks.
Gary, maybe you could just put the mute on for a minute, because somebody's voice is coming through.
It took me over a month.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I only got one in Okotoks.
I got one.
Okay, there we go. There's always some little thing. Okay, so getting clear on the why is really, and what's in it for me is, like, when I think about content. Now, obviously, there's other parts of content that are important, and but we obviously don't have time to get into all of that today. One thing I did want to share with you is, I just want to make sure I've got this right. Another one of I've got quite a few favorite books, but a book that I really love is called Made to Stick. I don't know if any of you have read that book. Has anybody read that book? Thumbs up. Here, I'll just show it to you. It's like, this is the cover of it, Made to Stick, by the Heath brothers. And they talk about sticky messages. So this is the only other thing I'll throw in for content that I thought was interesting is, so one of the brothers teaches at Stanford. And so he did this kind of little experiment where, and you can imagine Stanford students, they're pretty smart, they're pretty articulate. And so what he did is he gave each of the students a topic. They had to take a point of view on a topic and do a 1-minute speech, okay? And then they ranked each of the speakers who was the best speaker. So they were looking at things like how poised, smooth they were, and clearly those who were ranked as the best speakers had the smoothest, most poised, charismatic presentations, okay? So then what he did is he distracted the group. They watched like a Monty Python film or something like that. And then he told them to grab a piece of paper and then write down. There was only 8 speakers that they'd heard, 1 minute each, so it's not a whole lot, to write down what they remembered. What were the key points from each of those speeches? And what was really interesting is that they said that, and these are smart students, that of the 8 speeches, when students were asked to recall, only 63% remembered the stories that were told, and 5% remembered any statistics that were given, right? We often look up a lot of statistics. And what they found was that the most captivating speakers that were ranked as most captivating actually did no better than the students who didn't even have English as their native language when it came to sharing something memorable. And because they made their ideas stickier, as they would talk about, right? Storytelling is one great way to do that. And it's interesting because it got me thinking about when I was speaking at a conference and there was 2 keynote speakers. One keynote speaker I left saying, oh my goodness, he was funny, he was amazing, he had everybody cracking up. And I couldn't tell you anything about the content of his talk. There was another keynote speaker who I didn't think was that inspiring, but he shared this amazing message that his dad had told him about not having a plan B. This idea that you always have a plan A, And if that plan A doesn't work out, then you have another plan A. And it was just the message, and it resonated so much that it was like I couldn't forget. So when we think about content, be careful about, as they talk about, it may just stick the curse of knowledge. Sometimes when we know so much, and I know this is something I struggle with, we end up sharing too much information. So it's really getting clear on the why and the essence of what's most important. Okay, does that make sense? Are you guys with me? Thumbs up, shake it. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's go now to the mindset. So content, what's the most important thing about content that we want to do? Somebody shout it out. When it comes to content in our preparation, we want to make sure we know our why. Yes, I can see you mouthing it. I can lip read. Yes. and we want to work on making things concise and potentially sticky. That's a whole other topic. Okay. The next thing is the mindset. Now, all of us have these two voices on your shoulders. Do you know who I'm talking about? Here's the one that says things. This is the inner critic. You're going to mess up. Don't bother. What are you thinking? Nobody's going to listen to you. La, 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 la. You're going to mess it up. What are you thinking? Does anybody have that inner critic? Now, and your inner critic probably played a very important role at one point in your life, right? Keeping you safe. But we also have the other side, which is our inner wisdom, okay? This is like the little kid superhero who is like, no, you've got this. You can do it. You've got something important to say, right? That's the one we want to keep engaging with. We want to keep engaging with. But we do need to, sometimes you can't totally block out that inner critic. So the idea is like hearing what it has to say, all right? And how do you manage that so that that doesn't become your narrative? Because if you look for the evidence of how you've messed up, if you look for the evidence of why you don't have the presence that you want, if you look for that evidence, you will find it. We all find it. So we need to counter that, right? And so there's a couple of things that we can do to start to think about how do we counter that. We want to make sure that person who's doing the talking in our ear is the talking that we want to hear, okay? So how do we start to counter that? So there's a couple of things. So saying, stop it, don't do that, I'm not listening to you, doesn't work, right? It's sort of like saying, don't think about elephants. What do you see? You see the elephant in my office. As soon as we say, don't do something, that's the thing we're thinking about. So instead of that, there's a couple of things. The first one is, I want you to think about, and I want you to write this down right now, is to remember your strengths. What are those things that you are really, truly amazing at? And I know this is one of the things, this is something that I've been, because I do a lot of executive coaching and work, and I'm super passionate about the Clifton Strength Finder, Gallup's tool, where you learn about your natural strengths, and you start to realize, yeah, I really do have something important to offer. I do have these unique strengths. And it's something I know in the Wisdom Mentoring program that's coming up, that they do a deep dive into knowing what your strengths are, because that gives us confidence. But I want you to write it down right now. What is something, and if you're comfortable, write it on a piece of paper and then just lift up, what is something that you are really amazing at? What is something you're really amazing at? Maybe it could be strategy. Maybe you're really good at asking really thought-provoking questions. Maybe you're good at meeting strangers and making them feel comfortable. That would be something that I would say. Just something that and this is where I want you to take your humility and park it over here. Come back, okay? Park it. Okay, so we got a couple here. At identifying processes. Okay, what else have we got here? Great customer experiences, empathy, amazing. Karen, I can't see yours. Can you lift it up a little bit? Great at, I can't read it. I guess we need Sharpies. What does it say, Karen?
Coming up with innovative ideas.
Okay, innovative ideas, storytelling. Okay, so talking about making your content sticky, storytelling, our brains are wired to remember story. Strategy. Okay, awesome. And I want you to remember that and look at the evidence of that and keep those strengths in mind when you start to hear that negative nattering. Okay, that negative voice in your head. It's like, actually, you know what? I'm actually really good at these things. And here's some other things that I'm really good at. And I'm choosing to focus on those. Okay. All right. The second thing is when we think about mindset, which is, it's kind of similar to the first one, but there's this great little clip by Happify, Dan, why can't I think of his last name? He wrote the book called 10% Happier. And he's put together, I really encourage you to go check them out on YouTube. He's put together a number of these great little videos on mindfulness and what have you. But he has one on combating negative thinking. And it just really, I just loved it because he talks about two things when we start to have that negative thinking. Is number one, it's distract yourself, right? And in Super Better, she talks about that too, like create some positive emotion. So how do we distract ourselves, right? You could play a song and dance, right? Put on some music and dance, right? We can distract ourselves by watching a funny cat move video. Send somebody a text telling them that you care about them, something that creates that positive emotion and takes you out of that negative thinking, okay? And the second thing he talked about, which I love, is combat. And maybe it's because I was a lawyer in a previous life. He talks about thinking about being the best defense lawyer possible. So when your inner critic's saying, nobody's going to listen to you, you don't have the right experience, you don't know enough, your voice isn't loud and clear enough, or it's saying all these things, and then you go to that defense lawyer in you and look for evidence to the contrary. Okay, well, yeah, sometimes that's true, but here's evidence to the contrary. Oh, and actually, there was this time where I actually spoke up with conviction. Maybe it was around a non-negotiable. Oh, and there was this situation. Oh, and there was that. So start to look, and this is where your strengths tie into, start to look at the evidence that combats that negative self-talk. And you will find it. You will find it 100%. Okay? All right. Let's just take a moment. Let's look at our backpacks or write some other notes in your backpacks. Do you have anything that you've added to your backpack? Maybe something you already knew. Maybe it's something that you've added. Just take a moment to think about that. Okay, cool. Does anybody want to share? Take yourself off mute and share what's in your backpack, your leadership presence backpack so far. What do you have? And then we have the awkward pause, which is apparently something I'm not that good at. I'm working on. That's the third part of the 3 Ps, right? Prepare, present, pause. Okay, Karen, do you have something in your backpack?
So we have here self-awareness in our chat box coming in from Deborah.
Okay, cool. All right, I just want you to keep thinking about what those things are that you're going to pull out, right? Whether it's you're going to get that superhero picture, whether it's like, oh, I'm going to remind myself when I'm negative. What's the evidence to the contrary? Oh, this one kind of feels sticky to me. I'm going to add that. Oh, I'm going to remind myself of my strengths. Okay. All right, cool. And we're keeping in mind that if we want to try to it's kind of weighing the positive emotions to the negative emotions. Because what do we normally do before we go in to present is we sit there at our desk, crunched over with our pen, making notes, and you're kind of really constricting ourselves. So that's the third part about preparing is our body. And our bodies really can impact how we feel. Okay. Oh, there's my judge, my elephant judge, right? Come up with the information to the contrary. It's a great little reminder. I do quite like him. Okay, so here's before I go to that, the evidence to the contrary, I want to explain why I brought this picture up. I did an experiment knowing we were coming on here. And I'm just going to do this kind of as another way to think of things. So this is when I was about 13 years old. And my story, my inner critic says this to me: you have no eye-hand coordination. You are a spaz. Okay, that is what my inner critic says. Now, it has some good evidence, right? As a kid, when I played baseball, I was always the last kid to be picked. If the ball got thrown at me, I would be, oh my goodness, I can't catch it, I can't catch it. And what would I do? I, of course, didn't catch it. I would flub. I would hit myself in the face playing tennis because I could never hit the ball. Anyway, so I'm going into a tennis lesson on Sunday this week. And I was like, okay, I started in on this whole thing. Like, I have the worst eye-hand coordination. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go test out this whole, what I'm teaching, look for evidence to the contrary. And I was like, oh, right, when I did what was called the Prince Philip Games, which is like relay races on horses as a kid, my pony is in a full-out gallop here, and I'm bending over, dropping a sock in a bucket. So I was like, yes, I actually do sometimes have some eye-hand coordination, and I need to remember that. So that's the kind of idea about combating. I know that's not a work-related thing, but that's the idea, okay? And I actually did pretty well in my tennis lesson. I reminded myself of this. So just sort of some fun. Okay, so the third part of prepare is, so we've got the content, right? Our why, what's in it for them, thinking about making our messages sticky. Number two, we are thinking about our mindset, okay? What's the evidence to counter that inner critic? How do we kind of look at this in a different way? And then the third piece is preparing our body, right? So instead of going from being slumped over, think about when you go to a doctor's appointment and you're stressed out. What do? You sit there, and unfortunately, we all have these things, right? These things cause our bodies to collapse. We're laying like this. We're shrinking our shoulders in. We're telling our body to feel less powerful, right? And we think of power, I don't mean power over, I mean power as in being able to be your best self, access your best self. And that's what we do, when really what we should be doing is expanding our bodies, right? Sending the message that we feel open and confident. How many of you are familiar with Amy Cuddy's work on power posing? Thumbs up. Okay, hands shaking, waving. Okay, I think it's so. Okay, I think a lot of you are, and there was some question with some of her research because some of the experiments couldn't be validated, but she has a great book if you're looking for a book to read called Presence. And there is a lot of evidence out there, and I'm not going to cite anything specific, right? Because we don't remember statistics and we can look them up, but that the way we carry our bodies and our bodies will really impact how we feel about ourselves. They make a big difference in terms of how we feel. The experiment that they did specifically for her TED Talk was having people do what they call power posing for 2 minutes before they went into a stressful social situation, which was a mock job interview. And what they did is they had one group do what they called low power poses, things that shrink your body in for 2 minutes. And then they had another group doing what these expansive body language movements, sort of what we see here. And they did them for 2 minutes. So what they found was that the group that did the bigger power posing, or the large things, okay, so one of them being, I want you guys to play with me here a little bit, okay, so one of them is like this, our friend is doing on the screen here, hands up, okay, great way to air out your armpits. Now that we're not in the office anymore, you don't have to go into the cubicle to do this, right? You can do this in the comfort of your own home. All right, so there's this. Now, next one I want you to do, take your hands, put them on your hips, make yourself really big. Now, obviously you don't do this in the meeting. Oh, by the way, I have something to say. Because people are like, oh, what's with you? All right, it can be standing up and leaning in. Okay, like this. I don't know if you guys can see me. All right, standing up and leaning in. All right. Then there's sitting in a chair, taking up, I want you guys to take up as much space as you can in your chair. Take up as much space as you can, right? Making yourself big. Okay, that's the high power posing group. The low power posing group did things that made them small. So what do we do when we're nervous? We collapse our body in, right? So I want everybody to collapse their body and round your shoulders, okay? Round your shoulders, bring your hands into your body, okay? And then the hand on the neck, like this, head down, was the lowest of all the power poses. So if you catch yourself doing that, shake it off, shake it off, shake it off, shake it off. Okay, so what they found when they went into these interviews is, of course, the judges didn't know, who did the low power posing versus the high power posing, was the group that did the high power posing were more likely to be hired, even when they took into account how they answered the questions, yada, yada, yada. The group that did the low power posing, the group that did the high power posing, what they also found was that not only were they considered to be more likely to be hired, was that their hormone profile changed as well. Their testosterone levels went up and their cortisol, which is our stress hormone levels, went down. And so, and that's when we look at leaders or people who have a lot of presence, they have generally higher, both men and women, higher levels of testosterone because that gives us confidence, right? It's the dominance hormone, but it gives us confidence. But if you have high testosterone, high cortisol, that's the stress hormone, that's not a great combination, right? So it's this, we think about leadership, it's often having that higher testosterone, but lower cortisol, right? Keeping that under control. And so I figure, okay, what am I going to lose before I do anything, whether it's speaking, whether it's coming on today? I either do a power pose. The other thing I like to do, and one of the experiments when I went to do that talk in Dallas, sorry, not in Dallas, when I went to Washington, D.C., a 400-person closing keynote, a bunch, like it was internal auditors. I was terrified. And then I kept reminding myself of my why and my mindset. And what I did is I power posed, then I put on my favorite song, okay, in my room, and I danced around to my favorite song in my hotel room before I went down. And it's amazing. I know it sounds silly, but we think, oh, we don't have time. But do we have time not to? And this is one of the beauties of working from home. You can actually dance in your office or your closet or your bathroom, right? You maybe can't do that at work, but you can. So that might be another thing, is like put a playlist together of your favorite songs that make you feel amazing. And even if you're uncomfortable, give a little dance. All right, so we've prepared our content, our mindset. Obviously, the mindset takes a lot of work, but we're starting on it, right? We're engaging our superhero selves, all right? That little kid who's tenacious, who learns, who's willing to take risks, okay? And then we've got our body in shape as you're walking down. Maybe it's just walking to your office now on Zoom, right? But if you're in the office, you're walking down the hall and you're standing up nice and tall, having that kind of like, okay, I've got this. Your body is going to start to push you to feel more confident, okay? All right, are you guys with me? Big smiles, okay. Awesome. Let's give it a little shake, a little dance in our chairs. I was tempted, honestly, I was tempted to make you guys dance and put on a song, and I still might do it. But I do that when I teach workshops. And you'd be amazed at the shyest of people are like, we're going to do this, right? The other thing you could do is like laughing yoga. So let's just try this for fun right now. I want everybody, if you feel comfortable, turn off your mute, okay? Here again, like your body can trick your mind into feeling more confident, you can trick yourself into feeling good or happy with laughing, even if it's not a real laugh, right? So it doesn't even have to be something funny, okay? So what I want you to do is put your hands on your belly, okay? I don't know if you can see, I've got my hands on my belly. I want you to take a deep breath in, and I want you to laugh. Let's try it again a little bit louder. Take a deep breath in, and now really laugh. Okay, and shake it off. All right. Lots of benefits for laughing. Did a whole 30-minute session just getting a group of managers to laugh. And you know what? My son told me before I went into that, because I was like, am I actually going to be able to pull this off? And my son said, Mom, just own it. Just own it and do it. And you know what? If you do it, they'll come along. And because it was uncomfortable at first, people were kind of, and by the end, we had some serious hearty laughing. So that is another option is, again, is as I love how Amy Cuddy says, fake it. Don't fake it till you make it. Fake it till you become it. Or fake it till you feel it is kind of what I've been thinking a little bit. It's like fake feeling happy until I feel it. Right? Fake feeling confident until it comes. Whatever that is for you. And that's the thing, is it's not a one size fits all, right? What works for Diane and what I'm sharing with you, you might think that is so not going to happen for me, right? Now, but some things will be, yeah. And I'm going to encourage you to engage that little superhero kid in you. That's my son. To say, but I'm willing to try something, even if it feels a little silly. And for those of you who are managing teams virtually, I know one of the questions came out is like, how do you have that presence? Is do a few of these little things, push yourself out of your comfort zone. What's the worst thing that could happen? It's not that bad, right? So if I'd asked all of you to laugh and nobody did, oh well, like it's not it might be a little bit embarrassing, but really, why not? Why not give it a try? So you got to decide. That's a big piece, is you got to decide that you're going to speak up, or you could decide. It's sort of like difficult conversations, which is a webinar we're getting into managing reactions next week. Something also we're going to get into in the Wisdom Mentoring Program. I have the privilege of kind of deep diving more into these things in that program as well, because I'm going to be doing a few of those sessions. Is once you decide, that is another way to quiet that critic. Because you're not sitting there going, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, yes, no, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, right? Which we all get into. Make sense? Okay, cool. All right, we got some things, more things in our backpack? Okay, the power pose, according to Amy Cuddy's research, 2 minutes. 2 minutes is actually a long time to hold your hands above the air, but it is also a great way to air out your armpits. Okay, all righty, so I love this quote by William James. I don't sing because I'm happy because I sing. How true is that? How true is that? And that was one of the things when my son was recovering from his concussion that we did, is we would say, okay, we are both tone deaf, but we are going to start singing. And we're going to put on like songs that we like that kind of empower us. We were listening to Elton John's, what's the name of that song, right? Basically that comeback song. And we would turn it on and we would dance around the kitchen and sing it at the top of our lungs. And my other son is like, oh my goodness, that is so embarrassing. And we would laugh and have so much fun. And it really does. You want to try to create more positive than negative emotion, right? And there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and a lot of self-doubt that we have that puts us into that negative. So let's tip it over, right? More positive than negative. All right. Put some more things into our backpack. What have we got in there? Do you want to write anything down? Add it in, make a note. Okay, because we're narrowing the gap between, the gap is kind of like where we want to be, where we are and where we want to be. The gap can also be, do any of you know this? It's like, this is how you see yourself. And this is how other people see you. And it's like, why don't I see myself that way? Why do I always see the negative? Why don't I see that brilliance that other people see? Why don't I see, and not that any of us are perfect, but why don't we see that? Because we've forgotten to listen to that inner wisdom, that superhero wisdom of that little kid in us. We've forgotten to think about what our strengths are. And remind ourselves again and again, this is something I'm really good at. I'm going to own it. I'm going to share it. I have something important to say. I have something important to share. People need to hear this. And as you start to feel more confident, I know one of the questions came in is, what do I do if my voice is quiet or it cracks? It's like when you start to really realize and own what it is that you need to say, your voice might not be perfect, but it's going to project better. And I know when I first started, you know, on this journey, because this is when I kind of mess up in my life, like, you know, when I was struggling in my marriage, because I took the lawyer communication approach, like I'm right, I'm going to show you how right I am and show how wrong you are, and it does not work too well, and great in the courtroom, not so good in a relationship. Is I started just doing a bunch of research and then practicing and trying things on to see what works. And so it does take some experimenting. Okay, let's go on to the next thing, presenting. All right, this one's going to be a little bit shorter. We talked a little bit about when you think about actually going in to speak, it's making that decision. What I have to say is important. I'm going to speak up. Decision is huge. Whether you're a Tony Robbins fan or not, I do love this quote that he talks about, is using the power of decision helps us to get past any excuse to change any part of our life in an instant. Now, I don't know if I think it's like it's moving, it's tweaking, it's moving towards that direction. And I put this picture up because we often think about courage and fear being the opposites, but they're not really, are they? Right? Because you can feel fear, you can feel nervous, you can feel like you're going to throw up, but you still say, I'm going to step into my courage and I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to do it anyway. And it gets easier. You know, we often think of, I don't know, do any of you do this? Put your thumbs up or hands up where you think, oh, that person just has it figured out. It's just easy for them. You know, it's not like that for me. Do you ever kind of think that way? I know I do. And yet, I don't know one lawyer. I have many, many friends who are lawyers. I don't know one of them who didn't, when they first started doing trials and court appearances, that they weren't either feeling sick to their stomach or they were shaking with fear, right? But they just had to do it. So it's okay to feel both of them. But as you're feeling that and you start to feel yourself going to your performance or thinking about the outcome, it's like, oh, I'm going to remember why. Why does this matter? Why am I here? Why do I need to say something? Take a deep breath. Okay. And I think this is really important. I've touched on this, is letting go of this expectation of being perfect. Because you will forget something you were going to say. You will miss an important point. I am going to do a post-mortem after today and say, oh, I forgot this and I didn't do that and I didn't do this. And that's okay. It's more important that you really were focused on the essence of what it was you needed to say. The other piece too is, and we're going to talk a little bit about some few little body language hacks when you're there in the moment. This is not, again, not about perfection. I don't want you to get hung up on these things. I just want you to have them in your toolbox, to be thinking about them. Okay, that somehow they'll just show up for you. Choose one or two, try it on for size, then try another one. Okay, rather than trying to do everything at once. Right, because if we try to do everything at once, what happens? We feel like we're tied up in a knot and we can't do anything. So just pick one or two things and work on those. But one of the things, as you think about presenting, so think about the size of the room and the audience. Okay, so just before we get into, this is kind of a body language thing, but it kind of isn't. So here's what I mean. So when I went in Washington, D.C., when I showed up in a way that I was happy with how it went. I went down to the room beforehand to look at the size of the room and think about the space. So that if you're in a boardroom, how many people are there? And you want to project to the corners of that boardroom. Virtually, it's trickier, right? It's an extra little layer of, okay, I'm projecting. So I'm trying to imagine all of you sitting out there, right? It's not perfect, right? But I want to project to the size. I want my gestures to feel the size. But as soon as we're kind of aware of where our audience is, we can project out to it, right? We can project to those corners of the room. So part of presenting is really being aware of your space. Okay. All right. So let's go through and practice these together. A few body language hacks that are pretty easy to practice. So taking up space. So let's stand up if you feel comfortable. I'm going to stand up kind of short so you can see me. I want to make sure you can still see me. So taking up space. So this is often we think about the CEO stance. Put your feet shoulder width apart, okay? Shoulders are down, all right? Take up some space, all right? I want you to put your hands out there, take up some space, all right? Now bring your hands in a little bit, take them out a little bit, bring them in a little bit, okay? Shake them out, all right? And let those arms go. So remember, you know, taking up some space. Now, sometimes the CEO stance doesn't feel super comfortable. Are some of you thinking that? Give me the thumbs up if you're thinking, that doesn't feel super comfortable. I'm not so sure about that. Then that's okay. Don't get hung up on it. It's just one possibility. But just think about, watch the slouching on one leg versus the other, right? It's that, you think about how, I call it the CEO stance. Okay. That's a little bit of that wide set. Shoulders down. Now, I want all of you to do this. So everybody take your shoulders, squeeze them up to yours. Squeeze them up. That's the turtle effect. Now, what happens when we do this? First of all, I look a little bit strange, right? But this is what do we do when we're nervous, right? I mean, I know I'm exaggerating it, but we wanted, this is like the turtle effect. And it's sending the message to your body that you're not confident. It's sending the message to everybody else you're not confident. So let's just everybody drop their shoulders down. Drop them way down and take a deep breath in. All right, let it out. Obviously, you can't breathe deeply like that in the middle of a presentation, but we want to think about that breathing. For those of you who do yoga, think about some of that yoga breathing. Okay. And this idea of avoiding being small. Here's some of the things we do when we're nervous. So we might do shoulders up, right? But we do this, we bring everything in. We clasp our hands. Again, I'm exaggerating, but we bring things in. Right? So instead of staying open, we shrink this. And sometimes we even do this where we cross one leg over the other. All right. So just being aware of, just even if you say to yourself, take up space, take up space. I'm going to take up a little bit of space and my shoulders are down. Okay. Few little hacks. All right. And don't be afraid to talk with your hands. Right? Gives them something to do. When I was in that Dallas speaking competition, I had it all choreographed. And then I listened to somebody who said, hold a microphone, it's better. Now I'm like, what do I do with my hands? Oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. And this is what I'm thinking when I'm supposed to be connecting with the audience. Okay, clearly present is being present in the moment. I was not present in the moment. So if you're thinking, okay, I don't know, talk with your hands. Maybe it's not perfect. That's okay. That is okay. But let them go with the flow. Don't worry about moving, right? Okay, now, because most of us are not in person right now and we're not standing, let's talk about body language when we're sitting. All right, everybody, take your feet, plant them on the floor, flat on the floor, both feet, okay? Can you feel your feet on the floor? Wiggle your toes. Are they there? Perfect. All right, shoulders down, air in, same as standing, okay? And then this one, I want everybody to take your forearms, okay? Put them down on the desk and lean in. Lean into the camera, okay? Let's lean in even a little bit closer. Smile, okay? Whoa, that's too big of a picture of me. Sorry about that. Okay, but this idea is if you are, now let's imagine in a non-virtual world that you're here, right? You're leaning in, right? You're taking up, it shows I'm engaged, I'm interested, I'm confident. Sometimes when we're nervous, we pull back and we shrink in, okay? And I think still in the virtual world, like I'm no expert in the virtual world. I have been doing a lot of reading. I will say Gallup has put out a lot of things on managing remote teams that you may wanna check out. There's lots of information out there, but I still think that idea of leaning in, right, is still important. Okay, so here's a few things to avoid. Which this is the number one thing I do, bouncing your legs up and down, right? Very distracting. Or I used to work with a very prominent lawyer. He'd put his hand in his pocket with his change. We'd be in court and he'd be shaking the change, okay? Just a bad habit, right? So if you know you have these little nervous tick type of things that you do, you may want to think about what you can do with your hands. If it's holding something, maybe holding that pen makes it easier. If it's something that's going to help you to do it, all right, do it. All right, the second one is rubbing your hands together, right? So when we get nervous, sometimes people start doing things like this, okay? Or clenching. And then finally, the touching your neck or twirling your hair. It's amazing how often people do this and they have no idea, right? So that's where getting maybe a little bit of feedback is a good thing. Okay, so just some things to watch. But if you're going to take a step back from all of this, it's just that idea of just take up some space. Take up some space. Shoulders down so I can breathe. Lean in, knowing that what I have to share is important. And if you don't know what to do with your hands, if it feels like they're just like hanging there like limbs, especially if when you get back into the non-virtual world, you can always just do a steeple, right? So if everybody just can, for those of you that your cameras on so I can see it, just it's like somewhere where you can put your hands. It's like, I'm confident with what I'm saying. You know, you can, like anything, we can overuse it, but if you're feeling kind of nervous, this is something you can do, okay? All right. Arm gestures and hands. This is the only one I could find. It's a pretty funny picture. Didn't have to worry about copyright. So it's this idea of having the gestures, as I mentioned earlier, for the size of the room. Don't be afraid to make a point. So I want all of you to do this. Make your point with your hands. Make the point. Okay? Bring it in because it's only two of you. Obviously, you're sitting at coffee with a friend. You're not going to be like this, right? It might be more like this. And I'm sorry if my eyes are moving. I see you guys all to the right of my camera. And I want to look at you so I can feel like we're all in that same room together. All right. So that's the second of the P's for presence. We've got preparing. We've got presenting. Now the third one, and this one is really big. One I struggle with. Make your point and pause. It is awkward. It feels uncomfortable. And yet, it is the one that I continue to work on because I am a fast talker. I'm sure you noticed, you know, and you don't want to change who you are, right? Because presence isn't about becoming somebody else because that's inauthentic. And if you try to be somebody else, people can kind of sniff it from a mile away. They can sense it. It doesn't feel natural, right? If there's an incongruence between, you know, your body language and how you're speaking and how you're really like the kind of your real true essence, people pick up on that. You know, it's kind of like you think about when somebody gives you a compliment or some praise and you just know it's just not genuine. Like we can smell something that's not genuine from a mile away. And when I think about back in Dallas, I was not being myself. I was choreographing to somebody else's view of what I needed to be rather than being myself. So it's like, how do I start to honor the fact that I speak quickly, but have the pause? And this is one that takes some practice, okay? So if you're making an important point, and we're going to practice this, we're going to go into some breakout rooms, okay, and practice this. And I know some of you think, okay, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. I'm going to encourage you not to, okay? I'm not saying, no, it's only going to be 3 of you in a room. There's this great quote by Pascal, I believe his name is, and he says, you're more likely to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. So when we think about the pause, there's a few things, because what the pause says is this. It says, obviously breathing is important too, but the pause says, listen to me. I'm just going to stop sharing this for a second. Listen to me. I have something important to say. The other thing too is if we can start to slow down a little bit, right? Because if I start talking really fast and say, okay, now we're going to do this and we've got so many things to cover and I want you to really get ready because we're just going to do this. It's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, so good. How are you all doing? How's it going? Okay, is everybody good? Is everybody good? Great. Okay, so this is the most important thing. Do you got that? You remember it? Okay, are we good? Great. Awesome. How are you feeling? It's a little bit annoying. I see some of you laughing. We're doing some laughing therapy. Awesome. And okay, obviously I'm exaggerating, but there is this thing when you talk really fast, when we talk fast, and then we do that little up thing, we're saying, oh, what I'm saying isn't important, so I'm going to get over it as quickly as possible because you really shouldn't be listening to me because what I have to say is not that valuable. Is that the message that we want to be sending? So we want to think about it when we can, like a conversation. Oh, you're sitting in my living room. I'm talking, you have a question. Oh, okay. Now, clearly, as you can tell from so far in this presentation, the slowing down is something that I'm working on. You know, I'm certainly not there yet. But just remember, if you start to feel yourself getting nervous, and what happens when you get nervous, everything starts to speed up, right? And then you start gasping for air, right? So I'm exaggerating it. People pick up on that, right? It's like fight or flight response. Now your audience is doing that. Has anybody ever been to one where you're like this and the person's like, and you're like, okay? And if you completely lose your train of thought, just stop. Oh yeah, why am I here? Take that breath. And the thing is it's so interesting because the people that we admire are the ones who, like, you know, oftentimes will have one of those epic mess ups or what have you. And instead of letting it throw them into the ditch, they dig deep, right? And we're like, wow. But when we mess up, we're like, oh, let's get that inner critic out and let me tell you all the ways you messed up, right? And we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to anybody else. And yet we see people who, I think about this, a friend of mine, her daughter in a recital when she was 10, and she gets into the song, right? And then she forgets where she is and she just stops. And it's awkward. And then she starts again and she doesn't quite get it. And then she does it again. But she didn't get up and cry and she didn't run away. She finished the song. And I thought, wow, we admire that when other people can do that. And she's now in medical school. Took a couple of tries to get in. She did not give up. It's that growth mindset of the little kid. All right. So just being aware of, conversational. Yep. And the beautiful thing about the pause, it really is that number one power nonverbal, is it gives you a chance to breathe and to think. 2 added bonuses. Okay. All right. So Gary, can you put us get breakout rooms ready? Don't put people in quite yet. So there's going to be 3 in a breakout room, and here's how it's going to go. Again, I'm encouraging you to stay because there's going to be some good tidbits afterwards. What I want you to do is this. I want you to right now, I want you to write a maximum 6-word story framed in the positive about your experience with the pandemic. 6-word story. Positive, right? So again, our words shape our experience. So it could be, one of mine was crash course in online learning, or saving money on a wedding, or doing more yoga. Doesn't matter what it is. I just want it to be something positive. Okay? Then you're going to go into your breakout room with your 3 people. And I want you to do something before you start. I want you to do some move. That's in your chair. And then I want you to share your 6-word story using your presence. Okay. Not high stakes here. I want you to say it's way slower practice than you normally would. And the end, just pause. And everybody else is like, thank you. It will not take very long. All right. Do you have your 6-word story? Are you ready? So let's go into these rooms. We're not going to do this for very long. Let's give it like 6 minutes. 6 minutes. I don't know why I chose that, because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. All right, so let's do 6 minutes, and I will see you all back here. I want you to show your group your presence. All right, see you back here in 6 minutes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'm looking at myself. It's horrifying. I'm going to go here. That's the other thing too, is sometimes people suggest get better at presentations to videotape yourself. I think that's horrifying. I think we get too caught up then on things. So I'm sorry, some of you probably were mid-sentence, you got thrown back here. So how was that? A little strange, a little fun. We talked a little bit about strengths. I mean, it's just that idea of forcing ourselves to do something that might be a little bit uncomfortable. So one thing, just before we get to questions, that I want to share is this idea around the pause and what to do with your hands. Okay. And this is something that I learned that I found quite helpful is if you're making a point and you pause. So I say something like, at the end of the day, the most important thing is for you to get really clear on your why. And you see, I'm holding the gesture for the point, not going like this and bringing them back into like penguin arms, which we sometimes do, right? So that idea of if you make the point and you're thinking, well, I don't know what to do with my hands, it's great. What you do with your hands is you make the point and you say, you know what, I think it's really important that you have 3 tools in your toolkit that you're going to try on for size. Mind you, my hand should have been doing this first and then hold it. Okay, so everybody says, I'm making a point and I'm going to pause. Okay, cool. All right. Let us turn it over for questions. Turn it over for questions. And one question that came in that I did not address was somebody talked about, what do you do with like that idea of being sometimes being labeled or being seen as being overconfident or, maybe dominant or what have you. And I've definitely had that feedback before. So I think 2 things we got to decide. Number 1, where's the feedback coming from? And is there some value in it? We get to decide. That's the beautiful thing about feedback. We decide, right? Now, if we get consistent feedback, some of the feedback that I had was laser eye contact, sometimes getting in-person things, getting too close to people, that it was intimidating. And I'd heard that enough times that I was like, this is something I need to be a little bit aware of, right? I need to be aware of that laser eye contact and giving people a little bit more space, okay? So there was some value to it. So I think we really have to decide, like, you got to remember with everybody's going to have a different perspective on it. So if we have some consistent feedback that we think, yeah, maybe I need to tweak this, then that's great. But at the end of the day, I think that if we feel like maybe we get that feedback that maybe it's too much, pulling back a little bit is easier to do. I think most of the time we need to kind of, if anything, have a little bit more of that. There's also that thing around language that we use. So one, and I never, we didn't have time to get into that, but this is the last thing I want to say is, famous last words, is really watch apologizing when you go to speak. A lot of times the first thing we do as women, we get up there and go, oh, I'm sorry, and then we start in. We don't need to apologize for speaking up. Okay, watch that if you catch yourself doing it. Have something else to do instead, right? Because it's hard to not do a don't. Okay, questions. Karen, do we have any questions? Or if people want to turn off their mics and ask questions. And thank you for those of you who stayed right till the end. I'm super grateful.
I have a question. What are your thoughts on eye contact when it comes to Zoom calls? I'd have to look at my camera to make you think I'm looking at you in the eye, but then I'm not looking at you at all. So you can kind of know that. And you already talked earlier about looking to the side. Do you have any good advice on that?
That's a good question. And so I don't know if I really have that good of advice, but what I tried to do, I didn't do earlier because I had my presentation. And presentations can really throw you off, is number 1, I make the presentation smaller so it doesn't take up the whole screen. Okay. I don't want to look at myself. So the other thing to do is I always put on gallery view, right? And then I try to move. Right now, I've moved all of you over just below my camera, right? So I'm actually looking at all of you on the top row. And I'll look down a little bit. Before I was maybe looking a bit to the right so that I can be, if I look at the green dot on my computer, it is so distracting. So that's one of the little things that I've done. I don't know if that's that helpful. I think on Zoom, and the good thing about Zoom is I think it gives some of It gives us an opportunity to try some different things. And people aren't going to have that same expectation that you have that amazing eye contact, right? Okay, I hope that helps. Any other questions?
Another question, how do you handle questions that come at you?
Okay, can you give me some more context to that?
If somebody asks you, like you've just spoken about something, somebody asks you your opinion on something, or they want you to make a decision on something that's related to what you just spoke about, or they bring up something contrary to what you just spoke about, or another piece of information in addition to what you just spoke about, but that's related. Okay, well, I think first of all, there's nothing wrong with taking that pause, right? One technique too is if it's a question that you want everybody to hear the answer to is the tendency is to walk up to, if you were in person, that person to answer the question. I know this is my tendency. And something I learned at a course I went to for women lawyers, having more presence, was this idea of actually, you could repeat the question, actually walking away so that you're looking at the rest of the room as you're answering it, right? But I think there's nothing wrong with, if you don't really know, to kind of repeat that question, to not be afraid to not answer it if you don't have what it is that you need to say, right? Or you're not sure, or to say that you're not sure, right? Or that's an interesting point. Here's my experience. Kind of like reconnect with your purpose and your why. But if it does open up something that you need to think about, I think that's okay to say that as well. I don't know if that was helpful or not. Yeah. And Anita, I'm sorry, earlier in the breakout room, you got cut off mid-sentence, so apologies for that. Oh, that's okay. The beauty of breakout rooms, unlike a real thing, it's like, you know, it's like you're teleported. Okay, any other questions?
I have a quick question about any strategies that you have used to slow down when you're speaking. I am also a fast talker, and other than thinking, slow down, slow down, slow down, is there any strategies you've used to actually do that?
Well, that's a really good question. So the biggest strategy I've used that has helped me, and I obviously still talk very fast, as you probably noticed today, because you still got to be yourself, is the pause. So when everyone's, and it doesn't always come to me, but it'll be like, okay, stop. That's an important point. Stop, right? So that is one thing that's helped me. And the other thing is I sometimes will remind myself, oh, think about this. You're in a conversation. Because if I'm in a conversation, I'm going to say something. So right now I'm looking at Juliet. So I'm talking to Juliet, and then I'm going to stop because she's going to say something back, right? That strategy hasn't worked quite as well for me, but it is one that I learned. So again, what might work for you might be different. But if you go to your next meeting and you start to talk like this, people are like, what is wrong with you? Like, don't do that. Remember, small tweaks, small tweaks, small tweaks, small tweaks, small tweaks, small tweaks in our backpack, so that in those moments that count, we can bring our best self, not our perfect self, but we can access some of what we want to be able to access. Okay. One more question. Karen, have you got any that are written down there?
No.
I can pop in one more if you want one more. From the perspective of males versus females, would your advice change? You know, we've had this all woman present today. If we're presenting to a room of men on this exact same topic, how different would it have been, if at all?
That's a good question, and I don't think it would really be that different. I really don't. I think that where you see, I think, depending on who it is, where I often will see is sometimes the language that we use as women, words like just, or if we're sharing an opinion, not owning it and saying in my opinion, or I believe, or I think, or just here's the way I see it. We'll often share opinions with I feel, right? Which is not necessarily feeling, or using some of those kind of filler type of words. That's where I think there's maybe, and we didn't really have time to get into that today, I think there could be a bigger disparity there, to watch out for some of those. So there's a little extra bonus, you know, so I think there's that piece for sure. All right, so all of you, I had a picture, but I don't want to show my screen again. Don't forget about your superhero self, okay? find that picture. I really encourage you to do it. Remind yourself of it. That tenacious, outspoken, fearless, I will keep trying till I get it self, and engage her as much as possible. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your connection and your participation. Have a fantastic day.
And you, thank you very much. That was great.
It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.